Hello, everybody joining. See lots of people still joining. Some familiar faces. Hello, Debbie, lovely to see you. Oh, Howard as well.
Hi
Nice,
guys.
familiar faces.
Hi
Excellent.
everyone. Matt
As
Frost.
usual,
I'm Matt Frost.
if you are regulars to our webinars, then you'll know that we always give it a few minutes before we get started, just to give people a chance to join. Feel free to use the chat. We always like to see where people are dialing in from, see how far apart we all are. So do feel free to pop where you are into the chat.
Everyone knows I'm from Hastings. I put this in so many. One of these days I'm going to be in some exotic location.
We've got France, we've got London, Lancashire, Warwickshire, Nottingham. Very UK centric today. Sunny Hampshire.
I saw. Were you in Paris with your lovely colleague yesterday, Howard? Because I saw some updates on the Insta.
We were both there, but under our own steam. We said hi to each other, but yeah, we had we weren't actually sort of physically together, as it were. But yes, lovely.
Very nice.
When was it you were in Paris then? Was that last year or this year? Feels like ages ago now.
This year, earlier this year.
Isn't it? Yeah.
But in this Paris in the spring.
Beautiful. Very
Yes.
lucky.
It's very nice.
We have Yorkshire as well. Actually think, Isabel, you might be the only person from outside of the UK joining on the call today. It's very unusual for us. How come everybody's sunshine? I've got sunny Ludlow. We've got where else? Sunny Hampshire. Where's my sunshine? I'm not that far away from Hampshire either. I'm just in Worthing, and it's been drizzling on and off all day.
Tom, you can give me some tips on Leeds. My daughter's just started at Leeds Beckett Uni, so I'm going up to stay with her in a few weekends' time, and she needs some tips. She's trying to find some like alternative, like sort of more local sort of cafes and bars rather than sort of the chain in the middle. So any ideas on that, let me know, because I've been to Leeds many times, but I'm not really that familiar with it. So yeah, top tips on Leeds would be much appreciated before we get into the really interesting, important stuff today, which is onboarding.
I think that's the perfect segue, actually. Yeah, we've given everyone a few minutes, so I think we'll get started. So firstly, hello and welcome, and thank you to all of you who are dialing in and joining us live. And obviously, if you're watching this back on the recording, what a show you're going to watch. So we've got a fantastic guest joining us today, Toby Sinclair is here to talk about how we can reimagine onboarding. We talk a lot about the EX era. Those of you who may be members or follow the EX space will have heard that terminology a lot. So Toby will be talking to us about some of the opportunities and also sharing some stories from his experience as well. So Toby, I'm going to hand over to you. Let you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about the work that you've done, and obviously you've got a presentation to share with us as well. As always, do feel free to pop any questions that you may have for Toby into the chat. We'll make sure that we do have time for Q&A at the end as well. But by all means, do capture your thoughts and questions as we go too. So Toby, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. You can hear me okay, yeah? Excellent, cool. So yeah, just to get us started, I've got us a little Slido to do. So I'm sure many of you have used either Slido or Menti before. So just a very quick check-in activity for us to do. So please go to slido.com and enter the code that you can see on the screen. There are 3 quick questions I've got to ask you. The first one is just around how would you rate your employee onboarding at your current company, or if you're not currently at a company, your previous employer. See some votes coming in already, very, very quick. Okay, I'll give everyone a few more seconds. See, the votes are slowing down slightly. So far, we've got average, very middling. No one has said their onboarding is failing, which I guess is a good thing. But average and good. Okay, cool. Let's have a look at the next question. Just curious, from the people that are on the call, what are the kind of sizes of the businesses that you are operating within? So how many employees does your business onboard annually? You might not know the exact number, but just kind of roughly how many people are you onboarding each year? Cool. So we've got mainly lower numbers. I know obviously the market is a bit interesting as well at the moment. I know a lot of companies are onboarding less, sadly offboarding more than they're probably onboarding in some cases. But this will give good context for the talk today. And the last question, a bit of a broader question. What is your biggest onboarding challenge? So you can see one example that I added earlier today around misaligned stakeholders. What other challenges do you have across the whole onboarding process? Consistency and inconsistency. That's an interesting contrast. Cool. Yeah, so we've got like a consistent experience, and then the challenge on the other side of it being inconsistent. So not everyone gets the same positive experience, communication, automation, personalization. Awesome. It's nicely summarized them at the top. I didn't know it did that. So we've got a couple of themes here around consistency, the manager. So we'll be definitely looking at the role of the manager today. I saw a couple there around technology as well. So as we can probably see, there's like a ton of different challenges, which is probably why you're all here today. So I appreciate all of your input, and let's get on with the rest of the talk. So who am I? So yes, I'm Toby Sinclair. On the right-hand side, this is my wonderful wife and my 2-year-old son, Dylan, he's keeping me very, very busy at the moment, but lots and lots of fun. As Katie said at the start, I am the former onboarding director at JP Morgan Chase. As you can see, the scale of that business is completely insane. So every year we onboarded about 100,000 workers. So it's quite a challenge. You'd think at that numbers, we got very, very good at it. But like most organizations, onboarding was a significant challenge for us. I'll be sharing some of those challenges today, and also sharing some of the things we did to sort of reimagine onboarding at that kind of crazy, crazy scale. And then in addition to onboarding, I've also worked with leaders across a number of organizations working on their employee experience strategy, culture, and all of that good stuff that creates great places to work. So to begin with, we'll just touch a little bit on the kind of onboarding past and present before we go into the future. So these are just a few stats that I pulled out around the onboarding experience. And as I said at the top, sadly, these are not new. These have been onboarding challenges for a number of years. I think some of these stats were pulled out from like 2014, 2015, 2012. And a number of these issues are here today. And a number of them you echoed in the feedback that you gave, right? In terms of lots of paperwork, inconsistent processes. And ultimately, all of this does lead to retention issues, and 23% of new hires turn over before their first anniversary. So these are significant challenges that I know all of us are facing. So what's the answer? So when we think about reimagining onboarding, this is probably the first thing that comes to mind. Let's just give everyone a VR headset. And there are examples, if you do some research, of companies that have done that. Sadly, today, I'm not going to focus too much on that. It's my belief and experience that, to be honest, new employees don't want VR headsets. Reimagining the employee onboarding experience doesn't need to be so revolutionary. And when you peel back and look at the new hire experience and what new hires want, there's some very simple things that companies fail to do effectively that really move the needle. Things like the amount of paperwork and manual requests that are involved in onboarding candidates creates pain for both the new hire, the manager, and everyone involved, right? So looking at how we can kind of reduce the number of paperwork that's involved, getting people access to the tools they need to do their specific role from day one. Again, you'd imagine would be very straightforward and simple, but isn't always done. There's many examples when I worked at JP Chase where employees were waiting 6, 7, 8 weeks to get access to the things they needed to be able to be effective in their specific role. And importantly, there's some other like human aspects of the onboarding experience that are important as well, which is about employees feeling like they're part of the company from the moment they accept the offer, rather than assuming that the person is only part of the company when they join on day one. Actually creating that experience and that environment that makes the individual feel like they're part of the company from the moment they've accepted the offer, and making sure that everything that happens after that, it kind of confirms that they've made the right decision to join the company. So like I said, rather than focusing on reimagining the onboarding experience with lots of this interesting technology, at the end of the day, these are the things that we really need to aim for, which are quite simple, but again, very difficult to execute. And then we think about the business. These are some of the things that the business want. Ultimately, we're hiring to get some more capacity, to advance projects and products. So we want our employees to be productive quickly. We obviously want to retain those new hires in the long run, because again, if they leave, we're kind of not solving the problem. And we also want to turn our new hires into brand advocates that bring in new employees and create that culture that we're looking for. So why is all of this so hard? Like I said, a number of those things on that list are quite simple in essence, but it's so hard to do. And part of the reason, in my experience operating at JP Morgan, was just this organizational complexity that was involved in executing an employee onboarding. For an employee to have an effective first day, it's quite a complex supply chain, and the larger the organization gets, the more complex it is. But when I speak to leaders, even in smaller companies, there's still a huge amount of complexity involved in executing the new hire experience to ensure a positive and effective first day and beyond. And a lot of this ties to our organizational complexity, technology complexity, and all of the rules, regulations, compliance, and everything that comes together in a complex company. There's also many stakeholders involved. Again, when we think about the new hire experience, we tend to focus a lot on the new hire, but there's a lot of other people involved in the process, which they can have a poor experience too. One of the things we're going to touch on later is around the role of the manager, where managers tend to be overwhelmed with the number of tasks, activities that they need to do in order to ensure their new hire is effective and productive as early as possible. And then there's also a complex interaction and handoff amongst a number of these stakeholders, such as the handoff from recruitment to the manager or to other support teams that are involved. And often it can become quite confusing in terms of who is responsible at which stage of the process, which can lead to balls being dropped and activities not being completed. And then the last one is around the different personas of workers that we might have. These are just a handful of the ones we had at JP Morgan Chase, where we had a huge range of different new hire personas that were involved. Each of them needed different experiences or wanted different experiences. They needed different tools. They had different recruitment practices, onboarding practices, which leads to a whole host of complexity to ensure that you can deliver the right experience for a trader versus a chef or an airline pilot. And as we can see here as well, we also see different challenges along the onboarding process, where we might have the pre-boarding process, where it's just like paperwork hell, all the way through to the first 90 days, where you might have new hires that have started, but they're still unclear about where do they fit within the organization, what their goals are, and how they can be successful in their role. So all of this, I guess, paints a picture that I know many of you are probably familiar with around how difficult and challenging onboarding is to do well. And then the last bit of context is the employee landscape is also changing, which brings new complexity to the picture as well. When we think about onboarding, in my case anyway, I tend to think of the sort of desk-based worker, because that's, again, most of my experience in my career. And also at JP Morgan, we were largely working with desk-based workers. However, we see now in the market around 80% of the workforce are deskless, which brings new challenges when we think about onboarding delivery drivers or people within the gig economy who don't have a fixed desk or location and may not actually even work from a kind of a laptop or computer. We also see changes around the demographics and what workers entering the workforce are looking for. And that increase of Gen Z, for example, the research shows there's a desire for connection. And some of that is because that particular part of the workforce have a much higher feeling of loneliness, both in and out of work. And also the time in which people spend in organizations is also reducing. The average tenure for software developers, for example, is around 1 to 2 years, which again increases the likelihood that you're going to need to onboard people as quickly and as effectively as possible, because the likelihood is that you're not going to have the time because their tenure is actually reducing. So the next part of the talk, I'm going to share a little bit about taking all of this context into the picture. How can we start to reimagine onboarding? The first one we're going to look at is reimagining the organization. So this, for me, was part of the success at JP Morgan, was starting to think about how we start to reimagine the organization around onboarding. When we first started, a number of the stakeholders were very much focused on trying to identify the tool that would fix the problem. As all of you are aware, there's hundreds of different onboarding tools, HR workflows, and all of these tools claim to be able to solve your people challenges and onboarding problems. But when we started to look at the issues at hand, we found that a lot of the problems were actually due to the organizational complexity. Now, it's easy to roll out and implement a tool, as we had done prior to me taking over the onboarding role. But that hadn't moved the needle forward because our organizational complexity was the real issue. So what we did is we started to look at how we could move towards a more aligned onboarding journey and a more aligned onboarding team. When we started, it was essentially at the top where each individual silo was responsible for an activity within the onboarding journey. And each of those activities were not really well connected to each other, which meant that when we looked at the journey as a whole, there was disconnects across the end-to-end journey, which meant that although the request, say, for a laptop had been submitted, the laptop hadn't been provisioned. Or although the badge had been printed, it hadn't been activated by another team. Or although the start date had been confirmed, a desk hadn't been allocated for the new hire. So we had many, many of these breaks as we went through the end-to-end journey. And when we started to look at this, there was a few challenges. One was that each individual group had strategy is probably too much of a kind word, but each individual group had their view of what they felt needed to be done for employee onboarding, but that wasn't in part in the broader context of how we were trying to deliver the experience end to end. So there was no aligned strategy across these groups. So what we did is we mapped out the end-to-end journey. And then what we also did then is we defined a strategy bringing together all of these key stakeholder groups across HR, technology, security, facilities, and others to basically define how are we going to do onboarding at JP Morgan Chase? What does good look like? What are our challenges? How are we going to approach things like personalization? How are we going to get our interactions streamlined amongst all of the different teams, and basically came up with a strategy around how we were going to onboard the 100,000 workers across the firm effectively at an effective cost at the right quality for our new hires. And what that also led us to is basically defining an onboarding team that brought together members from across all of the various silos into more of an aligned, connected team that meant that we're able to execute the strategy and deliver some key improvements to the overall onboarding process. That was things like automating the provisioning of certain technologies, ensuring things like desk management was done effectively and connected to the various systems. So there was a number of things we did just to kind of optimize that end-to-end experience. There is a book I would recommend. I do have a few book recommendations in this talk today. One of them is called Team Topologies, and they provide a bit of a blueprint for how you can think about your organizational design. It's mainly geared towards technology teams, but can be very effective for this kind of idea on how do we organize teams to minimize dependencies and optimize for the flow of value through our organization. So reimagining the manager. It's a bit of a dramatic statement at the top, but many managers I speak to, and the research backs it up, they're burnt out, anxious, and they're miserable. I saw a stat the other day, which was, it likely was clickbait, but was that 1 out of 4 managers are miserable. There was some research behind it. But it kind of highlights that middle managers in particular are under a lot of pressure. And when the importance for that for onboarding is middle managers are often a very key stakeholder in the onboarding experience, both from a practical perspective, as I said earlier. Typically, in a lot of organizations, there's a ton of different requests that need to be submitted, information that needs to be provided. But also on a human level, there's an expectation that they will do a lot of the connecting, the coaching and supporting of their employees once they join the firm, join the organization. The problem is managers find it very difficult just to keep their head above water. So once you add into the new picture complex, high effort onboarding experiences, that can lead to a lot of pressure and stress, which can lead to requests being missed or the manager's diary just being full 9 to 5 every day after the new hires start, which means that they end up delegating things that maybe they should be taking on board themselves. So this is a big piece of the puzzle that needs to be solved for. And one of the problems we had to solve for at JP Morgan. And what we did is basically we did a time and motion study of the manager to identify where were they spending their time as part of the onboarding process. And what we found is that managers were spending, on average, about 4 to 5 hours of just pure admin time, going into systems, requesting things, submitting things. It was just basically a waste of time for the manager. Often because they were doing that, and again, they were busy, mistakes were made, things were missed. So what we did is we had a strategy to, as much as possible, automate as much of that to take it out of the manager's plate. We also delegated some of that activity to support teams where the automation was challenging or was like further down the line. But what that meant is it freed the manager's time up. And what we did then is we basically provided tools to allow them to become more of a connector and a coach for their new hires. We provided them data and information around people that the new hire might find useful to connect with within the wider organization. And we also provided the manager with training and support in how to coach their new hires when they joined, ensuring that they were able to have the right development conversations around goal setting and all of those things, which again, we found from the new hires, this sense of achievement was a big driver for them in the first 90 days. So having clear goals that they understood mapped back to the bigger picture for the company was really important. So, but when we found the managers that weren't doing that, it was largely because they were getting weighed down with a lot of this bureaucracy and admin time that was not effective. So by clearing some of that out, it created a little bit of space for the managers to be a more effective connector and coach. And there are, again, some books here that we shared with our manager community that were sort of very well received as well. I'll take a pause there for any questions before we go on to the next two areas of reimagining.
Lovely. Thanks, Toby. So do feel free to pop your questions into the chat, or you can, I think there's a little hand up button somewhere down the bottom if you want to pop your hand up and we can get you off of mute and you can ask your question direct to Toby. So any questions so far? Okay, question here from Jane. Did you need to create more capacity in the teams to free managers up?
Capacity in the team, what kind of teams? So let me answer based upon the assumption that we were how we created capacity. So one is we took admin time away from the managers. And then secondly, what we did is we did have a HR servicing team that basically we asked them to take on more responsibility for doing some of the requests. So that didn't necessarily solve the problem, but it was a short-term fix whilst we identified how we could actually automate those tasks away. What it did require, going back to the strategy, was to get buy-in from the technology teams this automation was important. Because again, one of the things we found is that onboarding priorities tended to be put down the list of things, which meant that they were just never addressed. But I think that was largely because there hadn't been the time spent on the business case. And there was a significant, like I said, there was about 4 hours of every manager's time for every new hire that was being spent on activities that could be automated away. And when you hire 100,000 workers a year, that very quickly creates a compelling value proposition that if you automate this, that will save the time for the employees. And also on an ongoing basis, you're basically paying down that, removing that tax from the organization. So that helps create I guess the business case to the technology teams that this was an important thing for us to do.
Brilliant.
Hope that answers the question.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. And there's another question here from Giles. So did you have any resistance from silo functions? And if so, how did you overcome that resistance?
Yeah, so lots of resistance as always. Yeah. I think a few ways we solved the problem. for resistance. One was, like I said, then getting the data to do the business value proposition. So actually, once we started to map out the journey and understand where some of the time waste was, and turning that into like a business case, that helped. At the end of the day, this is going to sound bad, but it's not enough to say we want to create a great new hire experience. I know we feel like at a human level, it's the right thing to do. The business required some more demonstrable reasons for them to invest the dollars in fixing something. And that tended to come down to wastage in terms of time from both managers, new hires, and other roles. So the more we could automate that, the more we could create a value proposition, which was the new hires can become productive more quickly. And also in the longer term, that might lead to some headcount reduction in processes that are now automated, and we don't need people manually submitting requests or whatever it might be within the onboarding experience. And then the other thing that probably helped was just we ran a series of workshops with various stakeholders to bring them together to get aligned on that strategy. So having people in the room together certainly helped as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely, I know that Lee and Emma, we can totally relate to that we know it's the right thing to do, and why wouldn't you want to give people a great experience? But sometimes that's not enough to sell it into stakeholders. So I'm sure there's other people on this call that have had similar. So thank you. Okay, do feel free to keep popping your questions in the chat as we continue, and we'll make sure we have time for more at the end. So back to you, Toby.
Oh, thank you, Kate. There we go. The next one I'm going to touch on is around reimagining the technology. So I said at the start, this is not about VR headsets, and I'm not going to talk about VR headsets now, but I am going to talk a little bit around the role that technology can play in reimagining the onboarding experience, because it obviously is an important enabler for kind of advancing things forward. So this is, again, just some examples of how we use technology at JP Morgan to reimagine the onboarding experience. As I said earlier, there were kind of two problems. One was around the hiring managers feeling overwhelmed and frustrated with the amount of time they were spending on admin stuff. And two, new hires were as a result of that, new hires were starting without the tools and technology they needed. Some new hires might be waiting up to 6 weeks or more to be able to be productive in their specific role. So some of the things that technology helps. So as I said earlier, one of the approaches we took was to try and automate everything. And that reduced the number of manual requests by automating certain workflows. We took an approach called role-based access control. Some of you may or may not be familiar with that, but that was a key strategy for us, which is around this idea of using data to determine what specific tools, access, entitlements people need for their specific job and role. As I said, at JP Morgan, there was hundreds and hundreds of different roles within the organization. And it was important that certain roles did not have access to certain tools. So it wasn't a case of you just give everyone access to everything. There was very important controls that had to be put in place. So what we did is we used one of the pieces of the puzzle was a thing called role-based access control, which has allowed us to make decisions that when the new hire started, or when the worker information arrived after they accepted their offer, we're able to make certain decisions and feed that into various automated workflows to be able to trigger events that would provision certain things automatically rather than having someone go in and manually request it. Second thing we did is we used artificial intelligence to build a recommendations tool. And again, where this helped is one of the challenges for hiring managers, especially those that didn't hire often. When a new hire was starting, they were like, I don't even know what they need. Do they need a laptop? Do they need a desk? Do they need a badge? Do they need this tool, that tool? So what we did is we actually, again, using data, built a recommendations tools to say, you're hiring this person based upon this person's role, their location, their manager, other people like them. Here's the list of things that you're going to need to make sure they have. Out of those, say, 50 things, here's the 30 things we've already gone and given to them. Happy days. Here's the remaining 10, 15, 20 things that you need to now go request and make sure are in place. So that basically made it super easy because managers weren't having to go find the things. They knew what they needed to do. And it also meant that the new hire would then start on day one with pretty much everything they needed to be productive. And then the last one is around solving that gap, I guess, of the not having clear goals, understanding the business context, and all of that kind of stuff. Provided an AI buddy coach to help new hires navigate the first 90 days, provide recommendations, answer questions. This also was used by the manager. We would send the manager notifications to sort of say, hey, we noticed that you've not had a meeting with your new hire in the last 7 days. You might want to schedule some time. So we use that to basically provide personalized notifications to help the manager as well, ensure that the new hire had the best start possible primarily within the first 90 days. So yeah, I guess the common theme there was just around data, really. And as much as possible, using data to inform the automation, the recommendations, and understand, in the example of the AI buddy and coach, understand the context of like the example, we noticed you've not had a meeting with your new hire in the last 7 days. You might want to arrange some time to check in or whatever it might be. No VR headsets. The other thing, obviously, with technology is just to remember that at its core, it is a human experience. So again, when we used to run weekly focus sessions with new hires joining the firm, and what we'd often focus on is how they were feeling and thinking as part of their first few days and weeks. And these were the common threads that came out of it that really, again, informed our strategy and approach, was like, how can we help solve these feelings for our new hires? And that was really about feeling prepared. They wanted to feel like they were the right choice and they made the right choice. And a lot of it was about creating that connection and feeling like they belong in the organization, which, again, the reason why I bring this up is that with some of the technology things that we introduced, we were very aware of, does this actually create a sense of belonging and connection, or might it actually erode it and take it away? In the example of like the AI buddies, perhaps that would not create the connection, and it would actually, the manager may spend less time in it. So we're very conscious around making the right decisions to optimize for the more of the human experience that we are trying to enable in the organization. And then the last reimagining is around the measures. My experience working with surveys for a long time is pretty useless for new hires, especially. When we were looking at the data, we found that highly biased, especially the sort of we had like a day, I think it was a day 1, 7, 60. I can't remember the specific numbers, but definitely the surveys in the early days were pretty useless. That might be because of the questions we're asking. We found that highly biased, new hires unlikely to give negative feedback in those early days. So really the data and information that we were getting back from those surveys we weren't able to use to drive product decisions and influence how we were approaching onboarding. So again, what we did is we took more of a data-driven insight approach and basically went out and looked at all of the available data sources that might inform us of the experience of new hires and other people involved in the process. And here are just a few examples that we looked at. Help desk tickets again, we found that a high percentage of new hires were raising help desk tickets in their first, either on the first day or in the first week. For us, that was an indication that probably if they're raising an issue with their technology, there's something not gotten quite right as part of that, especially if they're raising it on the first day to say, I can't log in, or I don't have a desk, or my badge, whatever it might be. That's probably an indication that the experience ain't great, which again is more revealing than asking them, did you have a great experience? Because again, when we map the data, sometimes users that raise tickets on the first day would say, oh yeah, I had a great experience. I spoke to Bob, I raised the ticket, he solved it quickly, everything was good, and I could log in on the Thursday after I started. And it's like, okay, that doesn't sound great. There's other things here around like activity measures, such as when people logged in, how many tasks they completed, such as their benefits enrollment. If they haven't done that, might be an indication that the process is confusing or there's some friction. Another one is around network size in terms of how connected new hires are to other people in the company. And again, using that data to encourage certain connections, or you might want to go speak to Jeff because of he's connected to this person and might be a good mentor, or whatever it might be. And this was just a sample. We probably had, in the end, we probably had well over 100 different data points that we used to pull together to give us an indication of a particular new hire's experience. And using that data, we were able to make informed decisions around where we should invest our time, money, and effort to improve the experience. And also what was useful is all of this data was then sliced by the various personas that we had. So we could see, for example, was there a particular challenge amongst our graduate population versus our trader population versus our branch, retail branch employees. So all of that allowed us to make better decisions around how we would improve and solve for the employee onboarding. And again, what we did, going back to the question earlier in terms of just how we influence stakeholders, pulling all of this information together into like a dashboard that allowed this that basically provide this information to our stakeholders, allowed them to see in real time the experience of our new hire population, and keep everyone transparent and informed on where we were at. So they were the kind of like 4 things I thought I'd share today around the reimagining, really about reimagining the organization, how we organize ourselves in order to deliver effective employee onboarding, reimagining the manager so they're less miserable and more effective in being a connector and a coach, reimagining the technology, so we're using data as much as possible to automate the hell out of everything so that people can spend more time on the connection. And then the last one was really about reimagining our measures, moving away from surveys and starting to look at using the data available that again tells the story of our new hires through their onboarding. And that's it. So curious, what other questions do we have?
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Toby. That's really good. There are a couple of questions in the chat already, which we'll come to in a second. I just want to quickly come to Emma and then Lee to see if there's any questions in particular that you had before we kind of open up to the floor. Give people another opportunity to add some questions into that chat in the meantime. Emma.
Thanks, Katie. Thank you, Toby. That was really, really interesting. Are you all right just to stop sharing your slides so I can see you properly? That's always good.
Yeah, I've also realised I've turned into a ghost with the sun where it is at the moment.
No, I'm just jealous. It's raining in Hastings, so I'm jealous. That was really interesting. Do you know what? I've got a few observations and reflections more than questions, because I think there's some really good questions coming through. So absolutely love the the emphasis on the human experience here. And I think, we've been talking a lot about AI, automation, etc. recently in lots of different ways. And I think this is a great example of where you can use the tech to take away the stuff that makes people's lives difficult, right? And it frees them up to do the more human stuff. I think that's a really great example there. Giles's question on the resistance piece, and I'm sure you probably did something like this, but what we found when we do this kind of work at People Lab and with the EX space is that, as you said, kind of workshopping that journey with stakeholders. So getting a bunch of people actually in a room physically, or in a room, online using a mural or mirror or whatever, and getting them to map that journey and their pain points, the moments that matter. Getting a bunch of people who've recently been through the experience, along with stakeholders, HR services, facilities, tech, just hearing it firsthand is far more powerful than any beautiful deck with evidence in it. And I found that that's the most effective way to get everybody talking to each other and to break down that resistance. So I don't know if you found that was a similar sort of journey.
Yeah. And I think for me, it was combining the left and right brain sort of thing, where it was kind of like the stories that to tell around the new hire experience, and also the manager and other actors that are involved in it as well, right? We found the manager was actually a key part of the puzzle. That was like, we heard a lot of stories from the new hire, but once we started talking to the manager, we got even more passionate like stories to tell, which was really good. And then on the flip side, combining that with the actual what the data says in terms of, for example, the percentage of new hires that are raising tech tickets, that was much higher than people had expected. So that kind of we were able to use that to combine that with certain stories that were told. And then last bit was then taking all of that and turning it into an actual dollar number to say, not only is this good for the human side and the experience of the individuals involved, but this actually leads to us getting our new hires productive more quickly, reducing the cost it takes to onboard, and ultimately we want to lead to the position where our retention and all those other factors reduce as well. So it was really the combination, I guess, of those things that allowed us to get the buy-in that it was an important thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. Thanks for that. And I think, your whole kind of case study is a great illustration of where using tools from design thinking, service design. You mentioned, you mentioned actors, but I'm assuming you use kind of service design blueprint or something similar. It's such a great framework that kind of leads you to do the right things without you having to mention it. Also, for example, using something like, service design or design thinking, it stops you from jumping straight to solution. And you mentioned that the stakeholders are going, give us some cool tech, give us a platform, give us some VR headsets, and you just go, well, let's just take a step back. So I just think, for those of you that are on the EX space already, check out the tools on there, because they will hold your hand seamlessly through doing the right things. I think that's a key point, is like these tools help you to avoid making the mistakes we've made in the past. They also, I loved your slide that showed the different kind of siloed actions. Get the right people in a room from the beginning who are involved in this experience, right? When you start thinking about the overall journey, the overall experience, you immediately go, well, it's not just HR. We need to get line managers. We need to get actual employees in. We need to get facilities, tech, whatever. And you bring that community together, and you have such a different result. So I think my take on that would be, it's a beautiful case study to bring to life kind of these tools and ways of working.
Yeah, 100%. And it all does start with that kind of mapping of the journey, understanding where the pain points are, surfacing the stories and the data to validate or invalidate those things, and then just experimenting to see what sticks really. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for that. So just a few reflections really, and a couple of points, but I'll hand it back to Katie to kind of ask other questions that I know are coming up on the chat.
Yeah, that'd be great. And Lee, if you don't mind, I'm going to come to the chat first, if that's all right, just because I want to make sure the ones that are already there get answered, just because we're fast approaching the end. So, okay, so question from Howard. So he was reflecting back on the point you were making about line manager stress levels, which is, I think many people can recognise. So how do we get line managers, especially middle managers, to understand that this is a core part of their role and not just another thing that gets in the way, especially in an organisation onboarding over 100,000 people per year? So any thoughts on that, Toby?
Yeah, it's really hard, because I guess the manager problem is not just unique to onboarding, it's across so many different factors. Yeah, like I said earlier, it's middle managers in particular are being stressed and squeezed from so many angles. It is very, very challenging. I think for us, it was about, we got buy-in when we said, you know what, we're going to take some of this stuff off your plate. So saving time for people is hugely valuable, especially middle managers. If you can say, even if it's one thing, you don't need to do that anymore. We've automated it, or we're taking it off your plate. Often people are very happy and more receptive to be involved. The challenge then, though, is that kind of like, what's the word? Sort of agreement of, we save this time, let's work with you to invest it in this way elsewhere. So for example, we save you 4 hours here. What we'd like you to do is spend those 4 hours preparing and planning the goals and objectives for your new hire, and laying the groundwork for their effective first 90 days or whatever it might be. So yeah, I think for me, the way into that was about, again, it goes to that kind of design thinking, right? Understanding what are the pain points of the manager, evidencing that you're going to work and solve for those pain points, and that builds the buy-in for them to be more effective advocates for onboarding.
Brilliant. Thank you. A quick question from Lauren. She said, what technology platform did you use to deploy all the AI recommends? And
yeah, this is an interesting one. So it was an internally built tool. And what we actually did to begin with is we actually just built it. The output was actually just put into an Excel. It's amazing how so many of these experiments start with Excel, right? But what we did is we built a very simple recommendations that we outputted into an Excel, and then basically just shared that with the managers as this very simple list. We're not perfect, because then the managers still had to go figure out, well, what system do I go request this in and all of that kind of stuff. But that, at least the feedback that we got off that was at least positive, to say, oh yeah, this is helpful. Can you also do this, this, and this? And that then informed the next iterations, etc. So yeah, that's where we started, and then we ended up integrating it with our ServiceNow tool and a whole bunch of other workflows and stuff. But it actually started off as a very simple experiment outputted into Excel.
Brilliant. And that's definitely something else that we really stand by at the EX space, a bit of prototyping, trying things out and testing.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, brilliant. Love it. A question / reflection from Isabel here. Can we imagine a balance between data-driven insights and getting direct new hires feedback? Employee experience being something personal, while we may think that having to open several tickets is a bad experience, that might not really feel that way for the new hire. Also, it depends on where they come from and their past experiences in that matter.
Yeah. So I think there was a couple of things, but in simple terms, what we did is we had a very much focus on the data, and second, to get the kind of factual picture, I guess, of the journey and the experience. But then what we also did is we had, every week we would have new hire sort of focus groups, coffee mornings across the globe. And what we did is we did an activity where we just did kind of went round the room in small groups, and they would share their experience, how they were feeling, what they were thinking, what their experience was like, from 5 or 6 dimensions. And that gave us the qualitative input. The great thing about onboarding is, especially if you've got a high number of new hires joining, you've always got new people that are willing to give you feedback. So your access to qualitative information from your customer is really good, and often very easy to get, because again, new hires want to contribute as much as possible in their early days. So we actually found a very high engagement level. And the second trade-off, which was really positive from those sort of coffee morning breakfasts, is the new hires also felt a sense of belonging from it as well, because we were asking for their feedback, they were involved in it, and it also gave us the more qualitative input as well. And also we were able to then use those sessions to say, oh, we're doing this experiment, or we're doing that. Would you like to be part of the pilot group? So there was a whole host of really good stuff that came from just running those as well. So it was the combination of just the hard data. I think going to the point around the tickets, that was more just for us as a team, we didn't feel it was acceptable. Whether the new hire themselves or not said, you know, I don't mind raising the ticket, it's fine, it wasn't an issue. For us, it was just one of those things which, like, it's not acceptable. If you join in your first week and you have to raise a ticket, for us as a team, that's not acceptable, and we're going to try and drive that number down as much as possible.
Cool. Thanks, Toby. And I think we've probably just got time for one last one. So, question from Jane. Had you noticed any unconscious bias in your onboarding that was surfaced in your campaign to improve it?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So I think one of the things we grappled with as a team is when we were thinking about the experience, it was very easy to fall into the trap of thinking about our employee experience. So, like for myself, for example, I didn't need any workplace accommodations. So that wasn't always top of mind for me of new hires that were joining that needed some accommodation in the workplace. I was also in the UK, and JP Morgan would hire across the globe in various different roles and stuff. So again, it was very, very challenging. We were constantly having to go back to remember who are the different groups that we're servicing. And what we did is we segmented out the populations, created personas, not perfect, but it did provide us an element of being able to say, this thing we're delivering here, is it going to be helpful or a hindrance to this group over here? But it was a challenge for us.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, if we had longer, I'd love to talk more about the personas. But if you are members of the EX space, then do check out some of our content around personas and how they can really help with those sort of challenges. You know, we've come a long way where personas used to be used to kind of segment audiences, and now it's much more about having those considerations and stepping into the shoes of all of those different sort of wants, needs and motivations of people. So yeah, like I said, I'd love to talk to you more about the personas, but we are coming towards the end of our time today. So I would just love to say a huge thank you to Toby for coming and sharing all of this with us today. If onboarding is something that you're looking at the moment, then we do have some more content. We have some great blogs. We've also got a recording from another webinar that we've done really recently where we had people that have actually been trialing some things within their organisation. Philippa Weir and Desiree Becker came on from Agco Corporation and talked about some of the things that they'd done for onboarding as well. So if it is something that's of interest to you, do check it out. If you're not a member yet, why not? You can join us absolutely for free on our Essentials range. I will very quickly flash up a QR code so that if you would like to join, you are able to do so. So do feel free to snap that and join us on the EX space. It's part of an ever-growing community of like-minded, passionate people interested in everything to do with employee experience and employee engagement. So lots more conversations like the one we've had today. Because I didn't let Lee have the opportunity to ask any questions, sorry, Lee, I will hand over to you for the final word, but a big thank you.
That's all right. I'll skip the questions this time. Toby, thank you so much. Just to reiterate what everyone said and the reflections in the comments now, really great session. For me, a real sort of powerful macro overview of onboarding, and in particular the need to sort of balance the kind of processy bit. You know, we need to be able to get in, we need to have our logins, we need the right tools for the job. The process bit needs to be slick and work, but also the people bit, that, as you rightly touch on, that connection and belonging piece is so important. You know, you can have the slickest day one experience in terms of the process, but if you get there on day one and everyone disappears at lunchtime, leaving you alone at your desk, it's all for nothing, you know. So really important, that people piece, and you know, my old hobby horse of line managers in particular. I'm so glad you touched and expanded upon that. So thank you so much. thanks for everyone who dialed in today and for your engagement and questions. Katie, thanks for hosting.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers all.
Thanks for tuning in. Apologies if you heard the fire alarm at the end there. So if you heard it or not, but
No, I
Didn't
you.
hear it. You got away with it, Em.
Thanks, everyone.